Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. This is going to be all the stuff that I got for the last half of October. There's quite a bit of manga to get through, as per usual. I'm sure that's not really a surprise to anybody, but I'll just get straight into it and I hope you guys enjoy. So first up for this set of pickups, I guess, is the second volume of My Brother's Husband by Gengoro Tagame. This is the second half of the 4-volume series, so these are 2-in-1 hardcover releases from Pantheon. And if you don't know anything about this series, it's absolutely phenomenal. Gengoro Tagame is a very, very well-known name within like gay commie circles. His works are, majority of his works, I should say now, not including this one, are very, very sexualized, very erotic art, and he is very popular within, as I said, gay commie circles, is incredibly well known, both in Japan and in the West. He is probably the most well-known gay commie artist outside of Japan, but this series is not that. It is about sort of gay characters and being gay, but not in the same way that majority of his other works are. The rest of his stuff is generally just like, you know, erotica for gay men. This is much more of a almost educational manga that really puts under scrutiny inherent biases within society and within individuals that they don't even necessarily know about themselves. If you don't know anything about this series, it follows our main character here, Yaichi, and his daughter Kana, as they welcome Yaichi's brother-in-law to Japan for the first time. So Yaichi's twin brother, Ryoichi, was a gay man, and when he came out to him, they sort of grew apart. Their relationship wasn't really ever the same, even though Yaichi didn't feel like he he didn't feel that anything changed with his brother. He didn't think he was weird or gross or anything like that, but fundamentally there was something different about their relationship, and they grew apart. So Ryoichi moved to Canada, met his later husband, Mike, and they got married. Over that, some years later, unfortunately Ryoichi got into I believe an accident, but he passed away without really ever introducing Mike to his family in Japan, or his brother, because the two brothers were really the only family they had left. So it was one of his sort of promises to Mike that he'd take him to Japan and introduce him and hopefully like reconcile their families. Of course, because of his untimely death, he never saw that to its, you know, fulfillment, but in its place, Mike goes to Japan to sort of pay his respects to his late husband's family, but also to learn about the country and the town that his husband was born and grew up in. This series is phenomenal. Definitely one to pick up if you enjoy LGBT manga. There have been a lot more licenses of this sort recently. Some really easy ones off the top of my head would be The Bride Was a Boy, My Solo Exchange Diary, and My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness, or even Claudine. And of course, one of my beloved favorites being Wandering Son. But this falls a little bit more into... it's sort of a middle ground where it is like fictional setup, but it does use its setting and its plot and sort of how it's being written to educate readers on certain issues, but not in a preachy way. I don't feel like it ever gets super technical with like a lot of minutia in regards to certain laws and that sort of thing, like The Bride Was a Boy does. But it isn't, this isn't like what maybe people think of when they think of like BL or yaoi. Doesn't fit within those categories. It is an LGBT manga first and foremost, and it is like a family friendly, almost educational manga, which really, I think it does a wonderful job in challenging inherent biases that people have in society that they might not even necessarily realize they do. And because a lot of the information is provided as sort of an answer to question, because the way this is set up, Kana, the daughter, asks a question about something because she doesn't really understand why. Like, in some countries, it's legal for gay people to be married, and then in Japan, it's not, and then gay people really aren't talked about, and some people don't like them, and so she has, of course, the innocence of a child. She doesn't really understand why there are these biases between people, and she doesn't understand how people could, like, be bigoted against other people. So in that way, her opening up the conversation and allowing this discussion also allows her father to really realize, like, how he perceives gay people, and how his own biases are performed, and how he never thought that he had a problem with his brother being gay, and he doesn't feel like he ever thought of him as a different person. But obviously something happened, because their relationship wasn't really ever the same after his brother came out to him. It's really, 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 really good. I know a lot of people maybe are talking about this, and I am a little bit later than usual to get this volume. That's because it took forever to ship out to me. And they're a little bit pricey, and they're just the standard size of like a normal manga volume, but it's absolutely, if you're into this sort of manga, if you're into heartwarming family drama, if you're into series that will make you tear up, because oh boy, this volume in particular really hits some chords there. I would absolutely 100% recommend this to you if you're into any of those things. I would also recommend it to most people. I think a lot of people can get something from this story. I think there's a lot of value in this story being shared. And the fact that Takagi is able to write such a powerful short work that obviously comes from his inherent understanding of like Japan's like social perception of the LGBTQIA community, and obviously his experiences within Japan, outside of Japan. It's just fantastic. It's so good. And for someone with such recognition in the West, like Takagi, it's wonderful that he's the one who wrote this, because it does get, I think, more attention, because it is, like, unfortunately the way licensing and how that works is, well, not works, but if this was written by somebody who doesn't have the clout overseas that Takagi, or in Japan, that Tagame does, I don't necessarily think this would have been licensed, which would have been an absolute travesty for it to go unlicensed. So just the fact that this type of story is available now to more people is wonderful. It's fantastic. I'm going to stop talking about it, but it is so good, and I highly recommend it. Yeah, it's so good. It's wonderful. Next, from Yen Press, we have the most recent volume of Silver Spoon, Volume 5. Oh, I'm going to adjust my camera just a little bit. Of course, as I've said with every volume of this manga, fantastic slice of life comedy by Hiromu Arakawa, mangaka of Full Metal Alchemist, and various others, but I'm sure FMA is probably the one most people are familiar with. This series is very different from that, but no less wonderful. I honestly think that this is her magnum opus in regards to writing the sort of story she wants to write. She's not at the behest of anyone else, and it has so much power and character to it that I don't think any other mangaka could write this with the level of care that she does and make it so engaging and interesting and so wonderful. Just so wonderful. Yeah, it continues to be fantastic. There's nothing really I can add to the conversation at this point. It's very funny. I do think the first volume is a little bit rough. It takes a little while to get into, but it does improve by leaps and bounds. And at this point, there's no question that this is a phenomenal manga. Even though it is about something that is probably not something a lot of people are interested in. We're following our main character as he goes to an agricultural high school. It's very much a coming-of-age, fish-out-of-water story where, yeah, our main character, our protagonist, is trying to find himself after not really knowing who he is and getting caught up in the pressures of Japanese schooling, sort of running to the country or retreating, taking almost what a lot of people would regard as like a spiritual journey to find yourself. But in his case, it's done through applying to a agricultural school, which a lot of people, you know, it's a very specific discipline, and understandably almost all of the kids there, or all of the kids pretty much at his school, have ties to farming or agriculture in some way. They already have a pre-existing relationship with it. Comparatively to him, he's just a pretty typical city kid, doesn't really have any understanding about farming or food production or, you know, animal welfare or anything like that. So it's really interesting in just that setup. And I think it's safe to say that a lot of people just generally in society, especially modern society, also don't really have a very close relationship with sort of the agricultural community. Especially those who live in, you know, large cities. There's definitely, I think, in the West, a more, people are more aware of their food. People have very specific diets, like veganism, vegetarianism, etc. That does make them conscious about, like, how their food is being produced, what's in it, as well as sort of like free trade, and, you know, that sort of marketing and awareness amongst food. But I don't know that a lot of people necessarily have an interest even in where their food comes from, as long as it tastes good or as long as it's affordable. And this, I think, is definitely something that a lot of people in Japan can relate to. I don't think necessarily a lot of people in Japan do know where their food comes from, insofar as like, oh, you get meat from pigs, and like obviously you understand on an intellectual level, but there is still a disconnect between like seeing eggs at a supermarket and then like seeing chickens lay eggs themselves. It's interesting, and Arakawa puts that conflict sort of, or that disconnect, first, like at the forefront of these series. But it isn't just about sort of, farming and animal husbandry and that sort of thing either. It is definitely a character piece. This is about the people whose lives are impacted by it, and agriculture is something that is a very, very, very hard industry. I think it's incredibly tough on families, regardless of whether it's feast or famine, but it is so easy to be not doing well when you are a farmer. We see it here in Australia a lot. There's very high suicide rates for farmers, because we have such terrible periods of drought here, which obviously impacts what can be produced and what can't, and yield rates and all of those things. But I think fundamentally that's the same everywhere. It is incredibly hard work, physically, mentally, emotionally, to be working the land in that way. And Arakawa never shies away from that. I think that's what really gives this manga a depth and a dimension to it, other than just like this interesting setting that, oh yeah, maybe you learn a little bit about like where your food comes from and it's a bit goofy. It's that human element that gives it so much heart and so much life, and you can definitely see how Arakawa, her own life has been impacted from it, because if any of you aren't aware, Arakawa grew up on a dairy farm, so she does have first-hand experience, I guess, with this sort of life and these sorts of people. So it is really, really, really wonderful. Again, fantastic manga that only recently got a license and is well deserving of all the praise, in my opinion. Yeah, definitely check it out if you haven't yet, but I'm sure that a lot of you already have. The second volume I got from Yen Press was Teasing Master Takagi-san from Soichiro Yamamoto. I think I haven't had a chance to read this yet, but this is sort of a comedy, almost gag manga about two middle schoolers who sit next to each other, and Takagi-san, the girl, is the master at teasing our main character, and they're always sort of in this interesting conflict of, he's always trying to make her, one, stop teasing him, or two, try to one-up her and finally tease her back and get her all flustered. But there's obviously like a lot of romantic tension between the two, although our main character is very oblivious to it. I haven't had the chance to read this particular volume yet, but I have seen half of the anime, which is really sweet. If you like sort of romantic comedies and middle school stories, I would recommend it. It just has a really playful, sort of innocent humor to it. And the characters, even though Takagi-san is an aggravator, they have a really fun dynamic. And regardless of always being teased, I don't think our main character would be very happy if she ever truly stopped teasing him. Yeah, it's really, really sweet. I'm looking forward to reading this first volume. The second volume just came out, so that will be on its way to me shortly. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it because I did really, really like the show of this, and I hope it's really good. Next, the only Viz volumes I got this part of the month, and they're pretty beat up because they are both secondhand, and that is volume 3 and volume 4 of Kekkaishi. Yeah, so last video I showed off volume 2 of this series. I had bought volume 1 way back in like May, and I really liked the first volume when I bought it. I bought the second volume via Kindle and really enjoyed that, then followed it up with the physical volume just because I wanted to be sure that I enjoyed it before investing a huge amount into this series, if that makes sense. And I'm still not going to buy these volumes new or anything because it's a long series. It's sort of hard to find some volumes for this because they're out of print, or not quite out of print, but the series, I think the initial print run was in 2006, and I don't think it's very popular, so I don't know how many print runs it's had. But at 35 volumes, it is complete. And reading these volumes, I'm still really liking it. It's still really good. Volume 4 in particular actually made me tear up. I don't know. There's something about this series that really gets to me. For anyone who doesn't know, and I did talk about it last video because obviously I got the second volume in that video. This follows our main character, who's a Kekkaishi, or like a border master. So at night he works in his area, mainly at his school, on his school grounds, because there's a lot of spiritual energy. It attracts a lot of yokai or ayakashi trying to get more powerful, and then they can go like crazy and cause a lot of destruction. So it's his job as like the legitimate heir to his family to stop them and to do his like borderline arts and prevent problems, along with his neighbor, who she's a year older, I think, and same idea. Their families are rivals. They both historically worked under the same master or lord, but their grandparents don't get along. They are friends, but they're not particularly, like, they're very close, but at the same time they sort of aggravate each other. And so yeah, it's mainly about like the different sorts of problems that crop up from having such a spiritually strong area, school grounds, and it does attract a lot of different violent ayakashi. The particular storyline about the ghost of a pastry chef is what got me like tearing up. I thought that was really, really well done. There's definitely a strong theme of family and especially brotherhood throughout this series. It's just, yeah, this series has been a surprise, but I'm enjoying it a lot, actually. I wouldn't say it's necessarily the greatest thing to come out of Viz, but for what I was expecting and what I've been getting, and I did have pretty, like, middling hopes for this series. I had heard some really good stuff about it, and like with another series that I started and completed this year, Nabari no O, you don't hear a huge amount about it generally, in general discussion. I don't think a lot of people necessarily put it on like top 10 lists or anything else, but the people who have, it's not very popular, not very like widespread throughout the community, but the people who have read or watched those series absolutely like think they're fantastic, think there's some really great stuff in there. They're really hidden gems, and at least in regards to Nobari no O, I totally agree with that. And Kekkaishi, even this early, 4 volumes into this 35-volume series, there's so much interesting stuff going on, so much potential, and there is this emotional weight to it that I wasn't expecting. Yeah, I've been really lucky with some of my, I guess, blind recommendations, branching out and slowly picking up some older series that I wanted to try for a long time. Between Nobari no O, of course Banana Fish, which I knew I would love, and Kaze Hikaru, I've just been, and Dorohedoro as well, I've been really, really, really lucky with my pickups over the past year. Again, I wouldn't necessarily say this is the most fantastic series of all time, but if you don't mind shonen, if you're looking for something a little bit different in your shonen, if you like sort of supernatural themes, if you like female written shonen because Yayoi Tanabe is a woman, if you like manga with very strong stories about family, and it does have this sort of, at least currently, it does have this episodic quality to it. It also has like a pretty interesting underlying mystery and tension. There's a lot of potential for this series to go in interesting ways and with a lot of different conflicts. It's really good, and I would say maybe check it out, because it isn't one that I think a lot of people know about, but it is one that is really good. It's so far impressed me more than I expected it to. All the characters, I mean, it's a pretty typical shonen setup, and but if you're okay with that and you're wanting something a little bit different, or you've read, you know, you're up to date with all your current shonen titles, or you've read all this stuff and you want something new, maybe try out Kekkaishi, because yeah, I actually think it's pretty good. Going into Kodansha, we have some more books that I got secondhand. These are all, again, sort of beat up, but they're not too bad. They're all these ones and the previous two are all perfectly readable condition. I don't really care too much about the covers, but you guys know that. I'm not super picky when it comes to secondhand books, especially for series that, like with this and Kekkaishi, I'm going into it blind. I don't want to spend a huge amount of money on. But these are volumes 2, 3, and 5 of number 6. So the manga adaptation of the novel by Atsuko Asano. And yeah, there's 9 volumes in all. I only need volume 4, I think, and then I have the complete set. And I haven't started, or I think I might have read the first part of the first volume of this series, and then just put it aside because I wanted to read it all at once. I am familiar with the number 6 anime. I do hope to maybe one day read the novels. They have been translated, fan-translated at least. So, as for when or if that ever happens, I don't know. But I would like to read this story because it is interesting. It's a sci-fi, sci-fi series about sort of revolution and social class and that sort of thing. I think most people are familiar with number 6 via its anime though, and it is available on DVD and Blu-ray from Sentai Filmworks. I've had it for years. I initially watched it as it was first coming out, and I remember how unlike everything else it was at the time. It was quite controversial at certain points because our two main characters are in a romantic relationship. So that got some people upset. As pretty much any anime that handles those sorts of topics does get, the vitriolic hate. But regardless, it's one that I've always really enjoyed. The anime isn't perfect. It is certainly very rushed. It has to fit a lot of plot into very few episodes, but they do the best they can with the episodes they have. And I really do think that it's a lot better than I think some people remember it for or give it credit for. It's one that I think a lot of people do remember fondly, and it is well deserved. But as I said, it's not a perfect series, and I don't think anybody has ever said it's a perfect series. The manga adaptation, I'm not entirely sure how much more in depth with everything it goes, because it is longer. You do have like a different type of freedom when it comes to comics versus animation. So yeah, I'm basically reading this because I want to know more about this series and more about the story. I really like the anime. I really do like these characters and the setting and the plot and everything. So yeah, one more volume and then I'm gonna sit and read it all at once, because I feel like that's what I want to do, just so I don't get left on any cliffhangers, because oh man, I've been left on some pretty terrible cliffhangers recently, and yeah, it's sad when you have to wait. Next we have volume 7 of To Your Eternity by Yoshitoki Oima. This is the most recent of Kodansha's, obviously, volumes for the series. A fantastic fantasy manga, sort of, from the mangaka of A Silent Voice. This volume sort of ends the last part of the story and opens up the newest part of the story. This volume is definitely very transitionary to the next major arc, but there's a lot of really important character stuff. I absolutely adore this series. Personally, I think it's better than A Silent Voice, but that's, I don't know, maybe a lot of people don't agree with me on that. They're very different settings. There are a lot of very similar themes though, and our main character is Fushi or Imo, whichever you want to call him. The books call him one thing, and then the Crunchyroll simul publications call him another thing. So either or is proper, I think. But yeah, this is such an interesting series. Oima is fantastic at like the really emotionally wrought stories, and she can definitely hit beats that make you very sad. I think she's really good at delivering like very genuine, emotionally relatable stories, even if you're not necessarily like one-to-one for what's happening. To Your Eternity follows an immortal being as he sort of learns, or they, I shouldn't really gender, an immortal weird sort of creature thing, who through learning about the world and knowing other people is able to learn more about themselves, but also like protect people from this sort of weird foreign threat called knockers, and Fushi really brings it upon themselves to sort of eradicate or fight knockers and save everybody, or protect them as best as they can. But through knowing other people, once that person has died, Imo or Fushi is able to become that person. They're able to put on the form of that individual. And through that, especially in this volume, they learned more about, like, the value of having people in your life and treasuring those relationships you build, even though, of course, for an immortal being, there is always the inevitability and the sadness of losing people important to you. That shouldn't outweigh the fact that you had those people in your life, and their value isn't in just like, oh, they're going to die someday. That's not the only value human relationships provide, or that's not the only thing human relationships provide. There's so much more that we learn about ourselves and each other and our place in the world through other people, and that is really what Oima is sort of exploring and showing through this series. Really wonderful. If you like the series, definitely keep up to date with it via Crunchyroll Manga like I do, because it just gets better and better and better and better. It's so good. It's always so good. It just continues to improve over time, because the first volume was really strong, really intriguing and wonderful, but it's the second and third and fourth and subsequent volumes that bring this series into what it's meant to be, into its all, and develops it to something more than just like an interesting premise. It's so good, beautiful, heart-wrenching, wonderful, creative, interesting story. Love it. Absolutely love it. Another wonderful volume from Kodansha, but in completely opposite vein almost, is Akiko Higashimura's Tokyo Tarareba Girls. This is volume 3. And this series is just so funny. It's so wonderful. It's a josei series about a woman in her early 30s who feels like she's like missed the boat. She feels like society sees her as unaccomplished because she's single. She hasn't really gotten very far in her work, or at least she sort of hit her peak without much more potential for upward momentum. And so she vows to herself that she will have, I think she'll be married by the 2020 Olympics. And yeah, so she's set herself this goal that she wants to have become more popular and successful and achieved more as per society dictates within 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or however many years. Within the next couple years. Her friends as well are sort of in the same sort of thing. They don't really have any major relationship currently. They're all fairly in, standard jobs, but they've prioritized themselves over what society and maybe their family and other friends think they should have done by this point in their lives. And I think for a lot of women, young and older as well, this really hits a chord. I think it's very relatable to the modern woman in seeing how there is this discrepancy in society. Of course, like with the advent of feminism, we have women in the workplace who do prioritize their work life over, you know, starting a family or getting married, or if they do get married, there's not necessarily an expectation for them to stop working anymore. And in Asia, sort of generally, there is definitely a push, like, oh, you have to be dating someone at least by this point. If you're not married by this age, then, you know, what's wrong with you? And that's changing. It's changing everywhere, but there is this inherent, you know, undercurrent within society that I don't think will necessarily ever shake about, you know, if you haven't done things, or if you haven't reached a certain point in your life at a certain age, then you're falling behind everyone else. And I think, yeah, for women especially, that's so, you become very aware of that very early on. Even, you know, in your 20s, you see friends or family pressuring you to be in a relationship, or to start working, or to get married, or to, you know, do this and that and everything else. And for a lot of women, that's, I mean, it's a huge pressure. Luckily, as I said, things are changing. Feminism in the 80s and women in the workforce definitely gave that a push to normalizing the sort of, you don't have to be married with 2.5 kids by the age of 30 in some places, but not all places. And this manga in particular really challenges those ideas. It's a really funny, fun, female friendship focused manga as well. I think it does so many things right. This dynamic between an older woman and a younger guy is done really well. Higashimura, I think, understands how to write incredibly biting social commentary with such humor, but it's like that painful humor, and you're like, oh, that's so funny, but also like too true, like too real. I felt that in my gut. Because she, like the rest of us, I'm sure, has experienced it. And although it is a very different set of characters than Princess Jellyfish, a lot of these themes of like acceptance and being yourself and doing things at your own pace and understanding where you stand within, you know, your friends group and society is the same. So if you liked Princess Jellyfish, I'm sure you'll enjoy this. It's done wonderfully, and I cannot recommend it enough. Again, lots of high recommendations for this particular video, but this is just a wonderful series. Fantastic. Cannot wait for volume 4. The series is complete in Japan. It's 9 volumes, so we're a third of the way through. And I haven't read all of the digital releases of this because this was a digital first series from Kodansha, but it's so good. It's so wonderful. I'm looking forward to more. It's just always wonderful. Finally, for this video, I've had to adjust my camera because this is a big book. It is Dementia 21 by Shintaro Kago. This is a complete series release by Fantagraphics Books, and Shintaro Kago, this is not his first book in English, I believe. Faku put out Psychedelic Love Gun. Kago is a very well-known, like, psychological, like, eroguro artist, so his stuff is not exactly the most easy to recommend people. But I do believe that Psychedelic Love Gun is more so, I think the subsequent reprints, the license is going to Dempa Books rather than staying with Faku, because understandably, Faku, like, tries to keep, like, prioritize stuff that's just hentai, where I don't believe Psychedelic Love Gun is hentai. It might, like, skirt the line a lot with the eroguro, but I don't think it's straight up pornography. I don't know. I haven't read it. And in regards to this book, there's a lot of weird stuff. Kago is definitely out there. He has a very, like, strong body horror element to his series. There's almost like psychedelic, weird stuff going on. But it's done really, really well. And this volume or this series follows a carer who helps the elderly. And she's sent to various different houses to help the people there. And weird stuff just keeps happening. Weird, crazy, you know, unbelievable stuff just keeps happening. There's so much, like, interesting things because there's a lot of social commentary in particular with this book, of course, in regards to how we treat the elderly within society. So, I mean, if you can put aside the, like, oh my god, it's just weird shit going on and you know, it's just weird for the sake of weird. It really isn't, in my opinion. I think Kago definitely, like, he has a style, and it has a huge sense of direction. I think it's very purposeful. He, like most other mangaka, doesn't write just for the sake of, like, doing weird stuff. There's definitely a message and sort of overall theming throughout the book, and I would recommend it if you're wanting something a little bit unusual and haven't heard of this book. Yeah, it's not super long. I believe it's like I believe this was released as like doujinshi and then collected into a single volume. I don't know. Don't quote me on that, but it's really interesting. I've only gotten about halfway through it, and there is a digital release that's been put out by someone else on the Amazon, like, Kindle marketplace. Do not read that because it is atrocious. It's basically, it feels like really shoddy scanlations that were just exported to, like, a Kindle file and then sold. Yeah, so don't waste your time on that. If you are wanting to read this series, pick up this book, because like with all Fantagraphics books, it is beautiful. It's this oversized trim. It's got a really wonderful feel of embossing, and there's like, you can see the patterns of embossing on this back cover. But it is, interestingly, a paperback book rather than like a typical hardcover release that Fantagraphics puts out. Although the standard is not, like, way higher. This isn't a typical paperback. I would say it's a little more sturdy than your typical Viz or Yen or Kodansha release. It's beautiful, beautifully done. Again, this isn't a series or a book that I could recommend to everyone, but if you're interested in sort of this genre, this style, something a little more interesting and unusual and eclectic, maybe check this one out, because this really does fit within Fantagraphics' niche of, like, very, very unusual, sort of unknown or underground mangaka, like very independent stuff that's a bit off the beaten track. You wouldn't see Viz licensing this, or at least maybe you might nowadays, but certainly not a traditional, like, Viz or Yen license. This is definitely one that Fantagraphics is very understandable. Denpa, I'm sure, is hoping to release these sorts of books. And even like a Vertical or Seven Seas, they are being a little bit more daring with the type of content being licensed and released. So yeah, I'm really happy that we are getting some more diverse manga available recently. I'm really looking forward to finishing this book. It is really interesting and really good. It's, as I said, not for everyone, so don't go into it blind. And I'm not sure if I'm going to pick up Psychedelic Love Gun because I really don't know anything about it. Maybe I'll look into it, but as for now, this is probably the more approachable of Kago's books. If you're not wanting to worry about so much of the Erogura stuff. But yeah, I haven't finished this, but I am enjoying it. I think it's really interesting, and it's nice to see this sort of stuff being released, because I do like wide variety and diversity within all of manga. It's nice to see all the different stuff coming out of Japan and what is available for English. Well, that was everything. There's not, like, it's mainly manga, and there's not a huge amount of, like, different series, but I still talk way too much about everything, so this video is probably way too long already. But let me know, there's a lot of, like, very different things in this pickup video. Let me know if you've read any of these, or your opinions, if you agree with me or don't agree with me. I like to read all the comments. I love getting the comments. As well as always, there is my Twitter in the description below. So if you are wanting to maybe, talk to me rather than leaving a comment, you can always reach me through there. I also have my Book Depository affiliate link, which is, again, just there if you'd like to use it. No obligation, of course, as I always say, but I really love Book Depository. It's a great resource for me and for many other international manga fans, because it provides free worldwide shipping, has great customer service, great prices, and, you can always rely that you'll get your books, at a fairly decent rate. They release things before street dates, so a lot of times you get it before they're even in stores, compared to, like, every other online book place, let alone the brick and mortar in-person comic book stores or bookstores in general. They're just by far the best that I've had to deal with. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. I hope everyone has a wonderful Halloween and a wonderful rest of October. And I'll catch you in the next video, guys. Bye till then.